You've probably all thought about it. What would you ask for if you were given the creative power to make the perfect Battlefield game? I'm talking full control from start to finish of the game's development and life cycle, with a team of super talented developers to complete your every need, and assuming it's reasonable, the option to include anything from previous Battlefield games in the franchise. Well, in this video I'm going to discuss what I'd personally put in my own perfect Battlefield game. This will include the setting, the types of maps, the modes, the weapons and gunplay, the vehicles, the options and other interesting parts of the game that I'd just love to see. I'm of course not expecting any of this to appear in the next Battlefield game, and it's certainly far too early to speculate what we'll be getting next, but I have always wanted to make a video like this, so here we go. Make sure you leave your ingredients for a perfect Battlefield game down in the comments below. I look forward to reading what you have to say. First off, let's start with the setting. This is really important in a Battlefield game, and arguably the most important thing to get people to actually purchase the game. I feel as if from all the previous Battlefield games, the best setting for me personally has been that modern era. Remember, this is what I want and what I would choose, so it's completely fine if you personally think that Hardline has the best setting, or more realistically, Battlefield 1 and the epic take on World War I that arguably beats everything else we've seen in the franchise so far. For me though, a modern or slightly futuristic setting, such as what we had in Battlefield 4, allows for absolutely everything I would want in a Battlefield game, and doesn't restrict the game to the boundaries of history and historical accuracy. So that's the first part sorted. The setting would be modern to slightly futuristic, let's say 2020. In fact, that makes perfect sense, as I'd probably call the game Battlefield 2020, a name that undoubtedly rolls off the tongue and is just a perfect way to pitch the game. Next up, we have the game modes. This one is fairly subjective, and from my point of view, Conquest is the staple Battlefield mode, and I usually spend 90% of my game time playing that. I do understand that the game needs a selection of modes to cater to all players, but that being said, there are some things that I changed from the current crop of modes that we have on offer. Things changed quite considerably when Battlefield 1 came out, with the introduction of operations and certain modes such as Rush taking a back seat. Firstly, Rush would return in all of its Battlefield Bad Company 2 glory, with purpose-built maps that bring out the best in that mode specifically. Valparaiso is a great example of this. I'd also look to bring in some great Rush moments that we saw in Battlefield 3, such as the base jump on Damavan Peak, which in my opinion is the best only in Battlefield moment we've seen. So that's the first mode, Rush, with proper maps and well-placed MCOMs, map boundaries and most importantly, a reasonable player count. I think the sweet spot for Rush is 48 players. The next mode that we'd need is Conquest. It's the staple mode of the game, and most players start their Battlefield experience there. A Conquest ticket system like we had in Battlefield 4, 64 players, limited vehicles on some maps, but on others, all-out vehicular war. I think DICE missed the mark in Battlefield 5 when it comes to the vehicle warfare. Some people wanted maps with no or limited vehicles, but others wanted 15 tanks per team, with air combat, transport vehicles and general all-round chaos. Having a Conquest rotation that allowed for all of this, maybe with 5 infantry-based maps and 5 vehicle-based maps, could work well, with custom rotations so you don't accidentally end up on the Conquest map you don't enjoy. As for the other modes, infantry-only Conquest Small, with 32 or 48 players, is really good fun. Operations was fantastic in Battlefield 1, so I'd have that return, possibly bringing in the Rush and Conquest modes together, so you wouldn't have to completely redesign maps and modes, making it fairly easy to do. And then I'd probably have the usual TDM and domination modes as well, for those people that just prefer the smaller infantry focused modes. I'd also take a look at the competitive side of Battlefield. Personally, I don't think Battlefield is ever going to be a competitive game, but it would be nice to have a foundation for communities to try and build their own modes, so possibly looking at that in the future, maybe a community mode, could be really fun. No mention of Frontlines here, and that is the one mode that I would also consider putting in the game, but you have to remember too many modes is not a good thing because you're splitting the player base up, so in my opinion, if one of the modes has to be dropped, it would be Frontlines, with Rush coming in and taking its place, and Domination having a lot of work put into it, so that's going to be the small infantry mode for those players that just want to have an 8v8 or a 12v12 infantry game mode. Now moving on to the maps. getting the right balance of maps is incredibly difficult to do, and DICE have had their work cut out with finding that stability in Battlefield 5. I'd take between 8 and 10 maps on release, with half being larger, more open maps suited to vehicle gameplay such as Gormwood Railway, Wake Island or St Quentin Scar. Yeah, you can have fun playing infantry there, but there is a lot more room for those vehicle players to enjoy themselves as well. I'd then take the other half as infantry-based maps such as Devastation of Rotterdam on Battlefield 5 or Amiens on Battlefield 1. Urban-based maps are possibly the easiest direction to go in due to the hard cover and routes designers can implement, and I'd be more than happy to see maps such as Grand Bazaar, Seine Crossing or Operation Locker make a return in this perfect scenario. You could maybe have a tank or two knocking about, but I think focusing half of the maps on purely infantry would reduce the chance of a bad experience for some players and push more emphasis onto those larger vehicle-based maps as well. Everyone would win in this situation, but all in all I would have 5 infantry-based maps and 5 all-out war maps when the game launched. Maps would be linked together with location, like in Battlefield 1, in order to allow for an operations mode with some sort of continuity when it comes to progressing to the following day of battle. With the game being set slightly into the future, there would be no issue in having 2 maps that link together like that, but having some landmarks in the game that would indicate where you are in the world would be really cool. As I know very little about the inner workings of the gunplay systems in Battlefield games, I'm just going to say what game did it best in my opinion, from the player's perspective. Battlefield 3. Take the gunplay from that game but alter a few of the numbers, making more weapons viable and stupid exploits such as macros ineffective as they are in Battlefield 1. The gunplay in Battlefield 3 was crisp, it felt great. I'd also say that Hardline did a really good job with the infantry in that game, and maybe looking to that for inspiration would be nice, but for the most part, Battlefield 3 gunplay with an updated netcode and modern servers would be heaven. I think most people who played that game would agree with me, but would also suggest that some things needed updating and it was quite primitive in some respects. Looking at Battlefield 1 for weapon balance, bar a couple of outliers in that game, it's fairly good. Battlefield 4 I don't think has a whole lot to say because in that game it's just the AEK G18 meta all the time, but the movement however in Battlefield 4 is something that I definitely look to have in this perfect Battlefield game. I want movement that is a bit more fluid. I don't like the pedestrian gameplay we have in Battlefield 5. The slide we had in Battlefield 1, personally I don't mind it, but again this is all subjective stuff. For me, I just want something that's taking all the best things from previous Battlefield games and rolling them into one. There is no need to reinvent the wheel when it comes to vehicles in Battlefield. Vehicles have been great in the past, and many people played thousands of hours in one specific vehicle in certain Battlefield games, proving their popularity. I'd go for Battlefield 3 tanks. They had the highest skill ceiling, the most to learn, and for the most part provided great experiences for both the driver and the gunner. Battlefield 4 LAVs, because of the tow missile. Battlefield 4 helicopters, also because of the tow missile, but because I consider them the most balanced out of all of the helicopters in the franchise that I've played. I'd also consider having a resupply for the chopper, meaning that you must fly back to base and land on the helipad to resupply the gunner seat, leading to less air versus infantry spam. However, the pilot wouldn't have to resupply as much. I'm just thinking ahead of time really, that attack helicopters, although they're really good fun to fly, sometimes they can be a pain to take out, and as opposed to having an annoying AA gun and a load of lock-ons, maybe you could limit that but also limit the attack helicopter. That is something that would need to be discussed further though, because balance is incredibly tricky to work out. I'd have a mixture of Battlefield 3 and 4 jets. As I'm not a jet pilot, this is purely based on what other people have said. And then I'd go for Battlefield 5 ground transport vehicles, and the reason for this is that they tend to lag a lot less compared to previous Battlefield games. I also think that Battlefield 5 has done a really good job with the different selection of ground transport vehicles you can have, whilst in Battlefield 4 you were limited to basically a quad bike and maybe a dune buggy, and in Battlefield 1 it was all about the motorbike and the horses. I'd also want to see an increase in transport choppers and transport planes. There is a big missed opportunity for that in Battlefield right now. And also, no in-house repairing in the tanks or the planes. I want players to use teamwork to get their gunners to assist them in battles, and in the jets and in the planes, I think that you should heal when going back to your base, or maybe when you're not in battle for 5 to 10 seconds. Moving on to the class system. I'd stick with Medic, Engineer, Support and Recon. The medic would be the class of choice for infantry based maps and would have access to close and medium range weaponry. You'd have defibs and medical boxes for gadgets, and you'd be forced to take the defibs and the medical boxes for gadgets. No stupid explosives over here. Now some people might say that you need to have anti-tank weaponry as a medic because sometimes you are on your own and you need to have some way of disturbing a tank who's shooting at you. Now the reason I would not have this is because the medic, in my opinion, is not designed to take down a tank, it's not designed to shoot at a tank or anything. What the medic would have instead, and what all classes would have instead, is smoke grenades, and they'd be forced to take smoke grenades alongside their other grenade. Now the reason for this is that you can throw it at your feet, and in any situation pretty much, as long as you've not run out into a massive field or out into an open desert or something, you can usually get back to cover and wait for a teammate to come and help you out. And this would promote more team play in my opinion, but wouldn't be super frustrating because you could always get away for the most part. The engineer would have access to the anti-vehicle based weaponry and would be the perfect class for a tanker to play. You'd have access to a selection of rocket launchers and a few different types of vehicle repair kits. One could be used inside the tank as a gunner to repair the tank whilst you're driving along. Maybe you take a hit and get immobilized. The gunner could then repair that tank for you. And the other would be from the outside in a similar way to Battlefield 3 and 4. I'm talking about a repair tool or a wrench, something like that you can jump out and then you can get to work on the tank. It's worth mentioning that I'd also cut down on the animations in this game, that goes without saying, but in terms of getting in and out of a tank, I much prefer what we had in BF3 and BF4, maybe with a small cooldown so you can't just jump in and out of tanks consistently, but it wouldn't be as we had in Battlefield 5 where you pretty much have to clamber in and out and it's just a waste of time. I'd do away with the pilot and tanker classes that we've seen in recent Battlefields and instead introduce a key system to vehicles, meaning those who spawn in it are in charge of who enters. If that person then dies, the tank is free to be stolen. However, if you get out to repair your vehicle quickly, a teammate can't come in and steal it. They can definitely jump in the tank, but they can't get in the driver's seat unless you allow them to. The support class would have access to ammo boxes and fortifications. The fortifications would be in the form of tank traps, barbed wire and spawn beacons. The spawn beacons are an unusual thing to put in the support class, but I personally think it would give the class far more utility when it comes to people spawning on you. You drop a spawn beacon, you drop an ammo box, people spawn on you, usually play around that spawn beacon and have the ammo box there. I think personally the support class is a bit of a failure in Battlefield games. Recently in Battlefield 5 more people have been playing it because the MMGs are so damn powerful, but it's not really a support class. People play support so they can go and use the weapons and resupply themselves, which I don't really like. I think having it as more of a beacon for your team to come and group around, and maybe having that tank trap, barbed wire, possibly the only class that can build the fortifications, would enable it to almost be a hub for your team and increase that team play. The recon would have access to longer range equipment such as sniper rifles, binoculars for spotting, and something else I thought of and thought that was pretty cool, wingsuits for dropping in from a spawn beacon. This would allow you to reach positions behind the enemy team and assist in those important flanks. Now I'm not thinking that the wingsuits would be something that would allow you to get on top of buildings and in ridiculous places, which in all honesty, it's a Battlefield game, that's what would end up happening. But my thinking behind this is when you're in a position where you're fighting head on with an enemy team, and maybe you're in your base and you can't get out, having a recon player that could spawn on a spawn beacon, it would drop them in midair, they could then use the wingsuit to get behind the enemy team, and there you go. Your recon player has done something really useful for you. He's got you a great position. He can then use his sniper rifle, or whatever other guns he's got in his class, to get an awesome kill streak, and that would be another only in Battlefield moment. And of course, you're also helping change the way the game's playing, and you're livening things up, and you've got less of that pedestrian gameplay that I really don't enjoy. All classes would have 2 gadgets by default, and most would be forced to take the first gadget. In the case of the medic, they'd be forced to take defibs and a medical box or medical pouch. The engineer would be forced to take a repair tool, and the support player would be forced to take ammo. Smoke grenades would be the most powerful grenade in the game, with thick smoke allowing for tactical pushes. Again, they'd be given to all classes. Flares and smoke grenades in different colours would assist in the vehicle infantry team play aspect. For example, you can have a red flare that you throw on a position and your squad mate can come down in his attack jet and know exactly where to drop the bombs. Players and communities would be able to rent servers in order to custom tailor experiences with specific map rotations, certain modes, and even more options such as limiting certain class usage and forcing certain weather conditions. I'm of course talking about RSP. We've come to a point in multiplayer gaming where these things should be included from the game's release, and it's absolutely criminal that DICE have refused to include custom servers on release in both Battlefield 1 and Battlefield 5. Sure, it came after a few months in BF1, and in Battlefield 5 we might see it in the future, but the impact on core communities has been huge, and it will certainly hurt the franchise in the long run. That being said, my perfect game would be built on community demands, and RSP would be a must from day one, with certain limitations so admins can't completely destroy the game, but also the right sort of options in there to make the gameplay better if it's run by a competent community. Live service or DLC? Well, judging by the previous few Battlefield games, having a paid DLC cycle has been far better if you are after more content. I'm also thinking that might be down to the fact Battlefield 5 has been rushed and there simply isn't enough dev power or maybe time to just create content whenever they want to. If it all goes to plan, a live service would make a lot of sense, but in the real world it just leads to additional disappointment and unfinished features. A long development is a must, and although developers don't often get the luxury of a 3-year time period to build this game, I'm in charge, so 3 years it is. Multiple closed alphas are essential without any of the information being leaked or shown to the audience. Recent Battlefield games have fallen really short when it comes to hyping up the game, bar the initial release trailer for Battlefield 1, which was really quite amazing. All of the DLC for BF1 was leaked early, maybe with CTE stuff or testing, or maybe someone getting a screenshot when they shouldn't have got hold of one. I want to have a game that is completely surprising everybody who wants to buy it, and the hype is through the roof. Some other things I'd really love to see: a solid anti-cheat, a battle log system with all the bugs ironed out, verified communities, a max rank of 100 with the option to prestige and continue that progression cycle, a battle recorder allowing you to check out your previous games like in PUBG. This would provide amazing scope for content creation. I don't think Battlefield will ever be a competitive game, but as I mentioned before, supporting communities that like to host competitive events would be nice. Visual suppression only, the usual Battlefield standard of soundtrack, a Battlefield 3 style UI, wide-scale customization for both soldiers, weapons and vehicles, a good progression system as I mentioned before, but with daily goals, weekly community targets, and tiered goals and personal statistics screens like we saw in Battlefield 4 that allows you to compare your stats to other players. A better netcode, a reduction in gadgets and features that promote RNG gameplay such as random artillery, elite classes, behemoths, lock-on missiles, and all of that rubbish. If we're looking at lock-on specifically, there's nothing wrong with them really, but you have to have countermeasures that actually work, whilst in BF4, countermeasures were very, very buggy. I want to make sure that system is flawless. All in all, you would have a Battlefield game that everyone can enjoy. You have the chance to play as a team and dominate matches, however if you wanted to, you could also play solo. Strong as an individual, stronger as a team. There are of course many other things I'd want in my perfect Battlefield game, but there is only so much you can squeeze into one video. This video is quite a long one, and you might not have even made it to the end. But that being said, I'd really like to hear what you people who did make it to the end have to say, and I expect some of you have already filled the comment section with your opinions. Thanks for watching, I hope you enjoyed, and I'll catch you in the next video.